1. The Sofa Club is live.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Peccadillo Sofa Club once again. My name is Rowan Ellis. I do many gay things online, essentially is why I'm here. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about queer pop culture and history. And I'm also one of the co-hosts of the Queer Movie Podcast. You will potentially have seen my co-host Jazza John on Tuesday talk to the filmmakers behind GBF. So I am very excited to be here today with all of you to talk to an amazing director, writer, actress, just all-round multi-talented human being that is Desiree Akhavan. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So it is worth mentioning, and I'm going to look at my notes so that I don't mess up this hashtag, because that would be a disaster, that if you have any questions for Desiree, you can ask them either at any time while we're doing the Q&A in the chat, or you can use hashtag Peccadillo Sofa Club on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And the amazing Amelia, who is our producer, is going to send me over those questions. So I will be having a look in our chat. So send them in any time and I will put them forward to the lady herself. So on the Q&A today, obviously we're going to be talking about appropriate behaviour, but we'll probably also delve into some wide ideas about the industry, by representation, all that good stuff. Just see where the night takes us, essentially. First question, going back to the beginning, back to the roots. I know that filmmaking was not always your career of choice. If you got asked as a kid what were you going to do when you grew up, from what I understand, filmmaking wasn't the first answer. So can you talk a little bit about how this came to be the profession you're in?
Yeah, well, it didn't even seem like an option. It's like, it felt like saying you want to be an astronaut, like something just wildly ambitious and out of grasp. It's not so different. I grew up wanting to write plays. I thought I would be a playwright, especially growing up in the New York area. It felt like I had a friend whose father was a playwright, and that seemed like a doable thing. I mean, ambitious and hard, but also something I had seen and had an idea of. And it wasn't until university that first I failed to make a space for myself in the theater community there. It was like one of those tight-knit groups, and I kept auditioning and not getting in and not really finding my place there. And then I met this girl who had always known she wanted to be a director, and that idea to me was so revolutionary. I was like, oh God, what does that even look like? And I just really wanted to be her friend. I was the type of person, I had very few friends growing up, and if I liked you, I would just copy everything about you until I became like an off-brand melted Barbie version of you that was not nearly as impressive. So like she wore cowboy boots and slips and jean vests. So I wore cowboy boots and jeans and slips. She waked and baked. So I would wake and bake. And she was like, if you take this film class with me at a different school, and it was really early. It was like an 8 or 9 a.m. class that you had to get to. So she was like, if you take this class with me and take the bus with me, I will smoke you out on the way over. And I was like, well, yes, what an invitation. And it was a world cinema class. And it was like falling in love. I was instantly like, oh, this makes perfect sense. How could I not have thought that I should be doing this?
I think it's an interesting thing with filmmaking, right? Because I think you're right. A lot of people I think who are interested in storytelling, they might do a play at school. And so even if they don't get to direct, for example, or get to write it, they sort of see that process in some way. Whereas film, I think for a lot of people feels quite inaccessible in that they see the finished product, but there's no process they can get involved in to make it. So there must be a lot of people who kind of miss that calling, I guess.
And it's really hard to tell what a director does. Like, I think I learned until I made Cameron Post. I was like, oh, that's the job. Like, it's different. Everyone does it differently. And what it looks like is kind of a mystery until you're thrust into it. And you're like, oh, okay, I get the nitty gritty of it. But before that, it's kind of unclear how films come together and who is responsible for what elements of it, and what does it mean to be a director. Those are all things I learned on the job. But I knew I was a control freak who wanted to point your eye in a direction. I think why I gravitated towards it was it just felt like complete control. Whereas theater, is at the end of the day in the hands of the actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there a big difference for you in that case between Appropriate Behaviour and Cameron Post in terms of what you were physically doing as a director, or was it just on a different scale, I guess?
It wasn't the scale. I mean, of course, it was a different scale. I had a little more support for Cameron Post, but it wasn't a big budget film. It was still a short shoot. I mean, it was 18 days versus 23 days, which is not nothing,
Yeah.
And Chloe was in Cameron Post and I was in Appropriate Behaviour, like huge difference. But at the end of the day, they were both low budget movies with a pretty green crew hustling to work together and make something larger than themselves. But it wasn't until I stepped off the screen that I realized what directing was. I think when you're in the thick of it, it's a very different job, and you have to put your weight on people in a way that looks different to directing when you're not on screen as well.
What was so you've gone to this film class and you've kind of fallen in love with this. What made you want to write Appropriate Behaviour? Was that like the first thing that you started on? Is that like the vision that you always had, or did you do a ton of other stuff that you kind of scrapped, or bits and bobs in terms of your first, I guess, feature?
There was a real journey from getting from that moment of, oh, I really love this, I want to do this, to making my first feature. I'm trying to think of the timeline, though. I was 19, 20-ish. I think I was 20 when I took that class. And then I made Appropriate Behaviour. I believe I was 28 or 29. It is stupid that I can't remember right now, but I was definitely, almost a decade between the two, and a lot of failure in between the two, a lot of embarrassing things between the two. There's this really great Ira Glass quote. It's like, there's this discrepancy between your taste and your craft, or your ability, for so long that you're trying to make things. And I feel that way, but I feel that way about Appropriate Behaviour too. Like, I can't watch that movie. I think it's so cringe. And I'm glad that tonight people are watching it, but like when I watched it, my skin crawls. It's a first attempt. It's someone searching for their voice. And before, it really took making The Slope, which was the web series that I co-created with Ingrid Jungerman, for me to get into a place where I could go make Appropriate Behaviour. But before then, I was really imitating my heroes and doing just like I did with the girls that I wanted to hang out with, like a half-assed poor man's version of whatever they were making. So I really wanted to be Noah Baumbach. I really wanted to be Miranda July. Those are people who spoke to me. So every time I looked at the frame, or every time I was looking at a page, it was like, well, would they approve this? What would their version be? Mm-hmm. And it took making The Slope and also getting a lot of rejection for my previous work and failing a lot and being invisible for me to get to the place where I was able to explore, all right, well, what is my version of this? And what does my voice look like? So I can then make the film. And it's funny because then when the film came out, everybody was like, this bitch is doing an impression of Lena Dunham. I was like, no, it's just the
people. What was the inspiration, if it wasn't Lena Dunham, for Appropriate Behaviour? Where did that come from? Because I know you've talked a lot about the fact it's not autobiographical, but it is personal. So how did that kind of flow through you onto the page?
Yeah, well, it was definitely off the heels of the breakup with Ingrid. I mean, it was definitely like, I have all these feelings. What do I do with it? But mainly it was Annie Hall. Like, it was, the structure was completely lifted from Annie Hall. And it was like, because actually it's how I felt after my first boyfriend. I fell in love really hard and fast at like 20, 21 and got engaged and was like, that's it, this is my guy. And he was a wonderful person, and we were both pure of heart and good people. And I really thought, like, if you're a good person and they're a good person and you're genuinely in love and they're genuinely in love, you'll just be together forever.
Mm.
And then when I realized that wasn't the case, I was shocked, because everything I knew about romantic love I had learned on television and in a movie.
Mm.
So I was really, really horrified that wasn't the case and that you could fall out of love. And then that was like, really, I was like, oh, the only movie I've seen that talks about that is Annie Hall. About, like, in the first scene, you know that they're not together, that this is a couple that will not be together, and yet you're still journey of them falling in and out of love. And that was the benchmark. But then another inspiration was when I did my first pass at it was actually Scenes from a Marriage, which isn't so dissimilar. It just was structurally something that I could afford to shoot. And then when Cecilia Purgiueli came on board as my producer, but also someone who shaped the story with me, she has a story by credit, we shifted gears and we were like, okay, I think you can expand the scope of this and not limit it so much. But I like working within the parameters that are given to me. I think that for me, really good work comes with restrictions. And that's what that was the inspiration for that script.
I think often when you're talking about that kind of indie filmmaking, there is the idea of the limitations of whether it's budget or location or who you have to act with, things like that. Did a lot of that come into the creative process, or was it a case of we write the thing and then we make whatever that thing is happen?
No, it was 100. I mean, that's what film school did for me. Was when I was first writing, it was like, sky is the limit. Be an auteur. Do what would Wong Kar-wai do? And then when I got on set, I was like, oh, this sucks. Like, this experience of shooting something that is not within my realm, not within my grasp or my budget, is the worst. Mm-hmm. How can I create an experience that's actually pleasant, that I can tangibly achieve a day of shooting this and not feel like I'm pushing a boulder up a hill? So 100%, this was all, and the way I work is definitely through a lens of what can I achieve? I don't want to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I actually think the more space I've been given when I'm approaching a project, the scarier it feels. When restrictions come into play, it really helps me figure out how to wrap my head around it and be creative within those confines. But Cameron Post, all of it was very much about what are the elements that I have in front of me. It's the way I like to cook too. It's like, all right, this is what's in the fridge. Make something.
Mm-hmm. What I found really interesting about looking at the title of the film, feels like it really interestingly encapsulates everything that's going on with this character who is looking at the social rules of whatever that is, whether that's relationships or sexuality or culture, and essentially finding herself in this grey area where she doesn't really fit in. She's not behaving the way she should do really in any of those spaces in terms of like very like what she should be doing. What was appealing to you around a character that kind of had that ambiguity to her or had that tension going on?
Well, it was me. Like, I just don't know. I mean, as much as I don't think I'm Shireen, like it definitely isn't. It's something I struggle with for sure, being inappropriate, and knowing what's the appropriate way to be, and also coming from cultures with a really prescribed set of rules and not abiding by them without even realizing it. So that's something I struggle with.
It's really interesting. I was actually going to ask about the non-linear timeline and how that came about, and kind of obviously you've talked a bit about your influence. What do you think that? How do you think that did that fit very specifically into the story that you were telling in this particular instance? Why was that the particular film that worked with the story that you wanted to tell in terms of your influences and the way in which that played out on screen?
It's funny, I haven't thought about this in a really long time, and I have a really bad memory, so when I think about it now, and I'm wondering if this is a bullshit answer or not, but I think it was because that's how I was grieving that relationship. Like, it kept coming to me. I kept missing different moments we had of connection, and then harping on the ugliness of our fighting. Like, I'm pretty sure that's how I was experiencing trying to get over that particular relationship and relationships I had before then, where it was like, when it was good, it was fucking spectacular. And when it was bad, I became the worst version of myself. And it comes at you non-linear.
Yeah. I found it really interesting because it very much felt like organically what the character was flashing back to, rather than it being an imposed structural choice of like, the film is now going to take you on a flashback. It very much felt like, cool, she's in this moment, but her mind is suddenly somewhere totally different. And that was really a really interesting, exciting, felt very organic to the character. I'm having a look because we've got some questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that they have a chance to kind of put their questions to you as well. So Madeline says you mentioned kind of working with a producer. How does working with a producer influence your creative process?
Well, my producer is my work wife. Like, she's my biggest tool as a filmmaker. So it influences me hugely. But I'm also really lucky. I don't think that many filmmakers have what I have. I mean, I think everyone has collaborators that they love, but I know that I'm spoiled. So basically, I met Cecilia Frugiuele at 20 when I studied abroad in London for the year. I met her outside of my first class, which was French New Wave cinema. Like, talk about a cliche. And we became best friends and spoke a similar language. And she was really like the first person I ever met who spoke my language. Like, I wasn't doing an imitation of her. We met on equal level. We both liked each other. We both wanted, had different strengths that we were attracted to the other person for. And we were both studying film, and she was interested in producing, and I was interested in writing and directing. And also, she was it was her first year of speaking English full time. So she wasn't that confident in her English, but it's amazing, and she's brilliant. And she's one of the funniest fuckers I've ever met. Now she's my co-writer. So we've bridged the gap from working together in these push and pull roles to being equals in writing script. And that's been a really incredible transition. And we form everything together. So she's basically I feel like we share a lot of this job. We share a lot of this taste, and it's basically sharing it, having the same taste as someone and going outside of your own brain to test out ideas and choices. And when it's a relationship that keeps changing, but when I'm on set and I really need an extra set of eyes, those are the eyes that I turn to. I'm really, really lucky to have her, and the choices I make in every step of my career, we make together. I see us as a unit, and I think my agents see us as a unit as well. So I forget the question. I just went on into a love story. What was the question?
That's very fair. That's very fair. I have a couple of questions actually, which are kind of similar, so I'll link them together. So Tom P says, I love your work. I will say I asked on Instagram for people to send me questions, and most of them were just tell her she's great. And I was like, she is great, you're great.
Thank you.
His question is, what is your advice for shooting scripted comedy with actors? And I also had a question that came from Instagram, which was from Kathy Bree, which is, how do you work on getting the right chemistry between actors? So I guess it'd be really great to hear you talk about kind of how you work with actors, how you make sure there's chemistry between them, and maybe a little bit about how that was for you as someone who was directing herself within this particular film as well.
It really changes based on who the actor is. I find, and I don't know if all directors are like this, every director has a very different approach to how they like to work. But the way that I like to work is I like to read the room, and I think that each actor tends to need a very different thing, and you don't know until you're in the thick of it. And it's really hard to gauge going in before you've actually been on set with them. Mm-hmm. I haven't had the luxury of rehearsals before. I had a little bit of time with Chloe and Sasha and Forrest before we shot Cameron Post, but it wasn't that much. And it was just basically like, let's hang out and get to know each other. It wasn't that scene heavy. It really is about gauging what they need. Some actors want a lot of attention and a lot of hand-holding. A lot of other actors resent it. The minute you get in their way, you feel this, they shut down. So I think it's your job as a director is to gauge what they need and respond to that. If I'm in a scene, I need to evaluate what my needs are and what my dynamic is. But also, I think a lot of the way you work with your actors is how you cast. Casting is a really important part of the process. So by the time I get to set, I feel like I have a really strong sense of who's there, what's the dynamic, and I get to hit the ground running. I'm trying to think how, when it comes to sex scenes, I can be really tangibly like clear about sex scenes, because I think it's more amorphous with different kinds of scenes, depending on how many people are there, what kind of chemistry you need, how much time you have. But I will say for sex scenes, I personally, when I'm in a sex scene, like to choreograph it like dance and know exactly where my body is. And a lot of the prep work for me on set is about regurgitating to the other actor and myself, like, okay, so this is exactly where it needs to be, and going through the motions of it over and over again until that second nature. And then when I'm rolling, I can, and discussing what is being communicated underneath the surface. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so in this scene, this sex is happening, but what are we saying to each other? Like, what is this couple learning in this moment? And then, so I know those two separate things, like what is my body doing? And then where is this the point of the scene? But I worked with actors as a director who's not in the scene, who hate that, who do not want to be told. Like the first time I did a scene with one of my actors, I was like choreographed her body exactly how I wanted it to be, exactly how I wanted her to hold the other actor. And I could just tell, I mean, she did a beautiful job. She was great, but I could tell she felt stifled. So the next time we went into it, I gave her carte blanche to do whatever she wanted. And I was like, all right, I'll watch a take. And if I like it, I'll shut up. And if I want to make adjustments, I'll make adjustments after watching the take. And I watched the take and I was like, it's perfect. Like, it's better than I could have choreographed it. So again, I think with other people's bodies, other people's point of view, you read them. You read where they're going with it. But I don't think that's how everyone works. It's how I like to work.
I remember I was at one of the super early screenings of Cameron Post, and you went off. There was like a tiny little Q&A before the film, and you went off about the shittiness of queer women's sex, like in films, and how it like had just been done so bad. And you were like, you guys in this film, it comes at you fast. Like, you're gonna see it. Like, this is.
Wait, what?
It was great.
Q&A. What did I say? I don't remember this.
It's so good. It was because it was a very queer screening. Like, I think it was a lot of like queer YouTubers and influencers and people who were absolutely on board with you being like, listen, sometimes straight men direct queer women in movies.
It pisses me off.
It happens. It was so interesting to hear your thoughts about it. Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, it feels like a lot of those movies, like straight men who are like, I know what'll raise the stakes of this mediocre screenplay. What if they were lesbians? Oh. And then when they're shooting the scene, it's sort of like an answer to the thesis statement, like, well, how do women fuck? Like, what do they just kind of like it's very clear that that's where their interest lies. Like, you can always tell what a director gives a shit about when you watch the film. Your eye is so like guided, so you can tell when you're watching a sex scene, usually like by a straight man, you're like, you're caring about all the wrong things. Mm-hmm. Like, that is because you're coming at it with a dick. Like, that is not where the pleasure lies. That's not where the tension lies. It's where some of the pleasure lies and some of the tension lies, sure, but it's not the heart of it. And you don't know what the heart of it because you haven't, like, you're just not in that room. And the fact that you feel alienated by that room is why you need to have it like mimic straight sex so much. I don't know. I could go on forever. It really pisses me off.
I guess at that point, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts around the conversations that we've been having about queer films and queer filmmakers and queer actors, and where that space has traditionally often been taken by straight directors and straight writers and straight actors. And a lot of the praise, you know, there's so many straight men who have won or been nominated for Oscars for playing queer men, and like, as far as I remember, like, no queer men have actually won an Oscar for portraying a queer man. Like, the discrepancy there is obviously really high. I wonder for you whether that does make a difference, or whether it's very much like a case-by-case basis thing, or kind of whether you have a particular strong thoughts about it.
I think it's hard. I'm not the kind of person who's going to make a sweeping generalization of like, this is good, this is bad, this is not politically correct, this is fine. I'm not a very politically correct person. And I think the film proves that. But I think authenticity matters. Mm-hmm. And you can measure authenticity in different ways. And also the dialogue keeps changing. Like, I think it's important that Philadelphia was made. Do I think that it's a travesty that Tom Hanks is straight and played in that role? Like, no. I think it was the film that needed to be made back then. I think the filmmaker, I know the writer was gay. I feel it. There was heart and there was authenticity in that, and also there was in the context of its time. I don't think it would be made with Tom Hanks now. It's hard to measure. It's hard to measure those things with sweeping generalizations. And I know for me where that authenticity lies. And when I'm casting and when I'm putting a film together, it's at the forefront of my mind. But I also think that when we do this witch hunt and we like are really digging our noses into like, is every single face on this queer or whatever, also we're making assumptions about actors who might just be private.
And I guess it's like, I mean, you're if you're talking about Cameron Post, you're working with very young actors. So yeah. You have this, I mean, what are you going to do? Be like, hi guys, sorry, first day of filming, just got to check in with you. You just, yes, no, tick a box. Like,
when we're working with kids that age, like, let the work prove itself. Like, is there authenticity on the screen? Is like that speaks volumes to me much more than me asking a minor, you know, where their sexuality lies. But, you know, it's insane. Like, I'm also equally outraged when like cis actors play trans roles. Like, there's such a dearth of authenticity in those stories. Why would we go there? Like, why wouldn't you take that opportunity? I understand. I mean, it has to do with financing, but then it's like, then make a film at a different budgetary level. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to sacrifice eyes for sure. But you're telling a story that it's a travesty if it's not told mm-hmm. with authenticity, because the way that trans people are treated in this world is violent, you know, like I get it all has to do with morals, mm-hmm. and all our moral compasses are so differently attuned. And to me, what's important is who's at the helm of this story. Who are the people whose voices matter the most on this shoot and with this final product? And sometimes it's the actors, sometimes it's the writer, sometimes it's the director. Like, it's really different. But yeah, no, I wouldn't cast a cis character in a trans role. But I also think that it's not a good place to put sweeping generalizations, blah, 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 and being inarticulate.
I've got like a whole list of questions now. The one that I think links to this really interestingly, Jay has asked, how does your directing style change when you were making Appropriate Behaviour versus Cameron Post, I guess, from the point of view of either it being a different genre, a different vibe, and also just things that you'd learn on that first shoot and since then that you wanted to put into practice?
Well, I wasn't in it, so I had space and perspective. Like, having perspective on set is so nice and does not come when you're in front of the camera. when you're in front of the camera, you're just hustling. You're wearing a lot of hats, and it's hard because sometimes everything being thrown at you at once is like gets you into that perfect frame of mind where you're focused and you know exactly, like, laser sense what matters, what doesn't matter, what you want, what you don't want, and you just fly through it. And then when it's a shit show, it's a fucking shit show. And the product suffers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But for Cameron Post, I had this luxury of being able to curate a vibe, of being able to curate a world. We all lived where we shot. There was so much space to be able to see what was being made and tweak it as we went. I felt like I had such a luxury of perspective on that shoot. And it taught me, or it gave me the space to learn what directing is, and to be able to constantly, like, evaluate where each department was and each actor was, and if I was getting what I needed, and if not, how to pivot. And also to identify what it was I was making, because it changes as you shoot. Like, a good example of that is the scene where, for anyone who's seen the film, there's a scene where they're about to, oh, sorry, spoiler alert. It's towards the end, and these kids are about to leave this gay conversion therapy center, and they run into one of the heads of it, like the teacher, at breakfast. And there's that scene, they're eating cereal in the early morning, and they're saying they're just going to go for a hike and they'll be back in a few hours. And we know they're not coming back, and they know they're not coming back, and they're worried he's going to come with them. He's, like, kind of thinking about joining them, and there's some tension. And I had a long shot list of all the coverage I wanted to do. When I saw it in my head, I was like, great, suspense. We're going to, like, finally, I'm going to be that kind of filmmaker who can build a vibe. And then when I watched the rehearsal, it was so clear that belonged in a oneer. When I looked at the wide master, I was like, oh, this is not at all about suspense. This isn't at all about the tension of, like, will they or won't they? Actually, it's about the sadness of saying goodbye and the person that they could have been if they stayed. And just for a while at the end when they leave, he just, like, sits and eats cereal for a few seconds. And when we were doing the rehearsal, it really broke my heart, and I couldn't have anticipated what that scene would be before I got to set, and what that film wanted to be. And it was very clear as we were shooting it. I think I had one film in my head, but as we were shooting it, it was very clear that it was a far more subtle, quiet, like, elegant, like it just wasn't the wham bam joke quip thing that I had in my head. It was dictating its own shape, and that's what changed on that shoot. Is, like, I got to listen to the movie, and with Appropriate Behaviour and The Bisexual, I mean, both of them, I was just running and gunning. Like, I was making my days. I was hustling. It was just about survival, whereas this was about blossoming.
That's amazing. Campbell X, amazing. It's going to be on the Sofa Club next week. It's all coming together, gang.
For that.
I think she's great.
Hi, I think you're great.
I want to know how she pitches a story she wants to make. How does she pitch Cameron, Appropriate, etc.?
So Appropriate Behaviour, we had the slope, which was, like, a pretty clear idea of, like, this is my sense of humor, and this is what a scene feels like, only we'll have more time to do it. But it also was, like, pitching to Cecilia. We didn't have a hard pitch on that. Like, Cecilia did the heavy lifting with that. But I think the slope was my calling card to say, and I had a full script. So I was like, this is the script and this is the web series I made. That was the package. And I didn't have to be in a room. When I pitched Cameron Post, which, by the way, no one wanted. It's not like I did a successful pitch of it. We had, like, one offer to make it, and it was for a quarter of what I thought the budget would be. And it was, but I did pitch it a lot. And it was, To me, oh God, I'm trying to think, did I pitch it differently than I ended up like selling it in when I did press? Because now like what the film is like very much like Todd Haynes meets Breakfast Club, you know, like in a gay conversion therapy center.
What a pitch.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what it was. But it was off of Appropriate Behavior. So I think people were confused. I think they were like, well, we want you to do this like 2 sluts in New York. One of them's getting married. Her friend's real jealous. Write that movie. Like it was a lot of like, she's a hot mess. And she wishes she were married. Like it was, yeah. I swear to God, so many like, she can't get her shit together. Wouldn't it be great if she were married? That's the romantic comedy trope. So I think people were turned off by the fact that it was YA. And if I was making a young adult story, why not make one based on a bestseller? And the book just wasn't like hot or sexy enough. It just didn't, and I feel like when I pitched it, it didn't have enough edge. So I don't have an answer because I can't remember how I pitched it in the room. I think I just was like, this is this really great book. What's great about it is that it's about this sad subject, but it's actually kind of funny. And it's showing this moment in your life where you kind of realize the adults don't have the answers and that it's up to you to lead the way. And that's how I feel about The Breakfast Club. Like, that's why I love that movie. And nobody really wanted it. And I think one of the people, a note I got from someone I really respect was like, I don't think this is edgy enough. And what I learned was like, oh, you don't know what I'm capable of. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess what I learned in the process of pitching that and pitching The Bisexual was like, I can't sell you on the potential of this. I think I need to put it under your fucking nose and like shove it up there. And I feel similarly now. Like, I don't want to get into a room and be like, in a world, like, you know, like pitch them the potential of something. I'd rather say, I think with pitching, it's like giving someone an undeniable fact. So it's like, for me moving forward, like I have a script I want to write, but I want to write it first before I'm in the room pitching. But, you know, to get paid to write it, I need to find one person who believes in me. And now that I have a little bit of work under my belt, that's an easier thing to do. But it's really hard. I think that having a full script would have made Cameron Post, would have made a lot of things an easier pitch, because there are things that on the page might not be that sexy, but I'm very attracted to things that at first glance aren't that sexy because they don't have a comp, like a comparable film or television series that was a blockbuster. And then you could be like, oh, I'm just regurgitating that thing. But it's like, if that were the case, why would I want to make it?
Mm. I mean, obviously, we've not exactly had a plethora of kind of mainstream queer films, especially for that younger audience. How much do you think that some of the pushback that you were getting was this idea of not only can we not really this is not really a comp of like a bestseller, but there's also not really a comp of any kind, even like a failed thing, because it's all sort of been this underground queer cinema, and this is one of the very few breaking out kind of around that time.
Yeah, and you're saying like it's the same as making a film that features like an abortion. Like you're saying that I'm cutting out this whole demographic. That like,
yeah,
if I make a queer story, if I make a pro-choice story, like there's a reason Knocked Up was really popular. There's a reason why like, and for that, like there's a reason Love, Simon is the most popular queer film. Probably, I think like I'm guessing of like all films making money, I think Love, Simon is probably the most commercial, and it's because of it's queer, but it's in the package that we're all very familiar with. Mm-hmm. There has to be, I think, to be commercial, that kind of familiarity that people, and what's interesting about being a queer filmmaker is the things you're attracted to are things I will say that I'm attracted to as a filmmaker are weirdness, are playing with form, playing with style, playing with mise en scène in a way that I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
But I think what makes queerness palatable is not playing, sticking to the rules, doing it in a way. And I understand that. And I think the longer I do this, the more I would like to speak that language and like find a way to have my voice become palatable. But I also think that's craft, and to do it beautifully is craft, is something that you get better at the more you do it. And I'm still learning a lot of those basics of like how to do this with authenticity, not just do this to do this. Mm-hmm. Or that some mainstream things do it, where you're like, you suck.
Have you seen a particular difference, I guess, in audience response to appropriate behaviour, or like anything you've done, I guess, from the queer community versus people outside of that community? Do you feel like there's a different response, or do you think it kind of, there's other differences in people's responses that don't necessarily go along those kind of lines?
A difference between the way that queer audiences respond to my work versus not queer audiences. I think queer audiences know my work and see it, and other audiences have never heard of me. I think that's the difference.
I mean, I guess to that effect, I feel like the humour of appropriate behaviour, when I was watching it, I was like, oh man, this is really British. Like the dryness to it is really...
I will say, I think British audiences liked appropriate behaviour much more than American audiences.
We were like, oh, we see you. You know what's going on here. At a convention a few months ago with a load of kind of YouTube people, and it was pretty much all Brits and one poor American. And we were just having one of those conversations of dry kind of conversations where you're all joking and you're all joining in on the joke, but none of you are laughing because you all understand it's funny. And we got to the end of this 5-minute conversation and she was just sat there like, you guys were kidding, right? Like, that's not right. That was what was happening. We were like, she was like, I'm used to laugh tracks. I don't know how to deal with this dry humor. Like, what is this? So it was really, really interesting to see that kind of played out on screen. Yeah. So were you expecting that? Did you kind of see where that humor was going to be, or was it kind of a surprise when that came to the UK and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess you guys get it?
When you make anything, it's really hard to expect anything, and maybe you shouldn't expect. Like, it's hard to know. When I made appropriate behavior, like, I just didn't want it to be something that humiliated me for the rest of my life. Like this, like, that girl tried to make a movie once. Yikes. You know, I was just so relieved that it was seen by anybody. Mm. So the idea of like prioritizing, well, Brits will get this and Americans will get that. Like, the fact that we had a British distributor blew my mind. Like, it was all a shock that we were having these conversations. It was a shock that people were watching it. But also it's still hard to gauge. Like, I think people make an assumption because they've heard of something that other people have as well. I have no real sense of what the work has done outside of myself. And maybe it's good not to know. Maybe it's good to know. I don't know. It's a relationship between myself and the work, and the life it lives without me is a weird one that I'm constantly reevaluating.
Actually, I've just realized one of the first questions we had that I was like, I'm going to save for a bit later when it becomes more relevant, and it has. Julia is interested in how do you find the film and TV industry different in different places, particularly the UK compared to the US, for example? Do you see big differences there, or do you think it kind of all ends up being pretty similar in your experiences?
No, it's a big difference. The UK is a much smaller marketplace. They have less money to work with, but they take more risks. Yeah, I mean, that would be my like shorthand version. But also, working in the British industry is different. I think the way that British people do business is really is very different than the way Americans do business in any industry, but especially the film and television industry. Also, America is outputting to the world. The UK is trying to please the UK. Like, they have they have a smaller audience, but a specific audience too. So it's, oh God, I wish I could be articulate right now. And I know you're recording and this is going to live. So I would be saying a very different answer if this wasn't going permanently on YouTube. So I'm going to leave it at that. But the answer is yes, they're very different.
Excellent. We kind of talked a little bit earlier about the kind of representation in various ways. We had a question on Instagram from Han Denham who wanted to know your thoughts on, how did she put it? The split of gay stories focusing on coming out or dealing with homophobia. And I guess it's a version of a question I often hear asked, that kind of idea of like, have we had enough of coming out stories? What other stories are there to tell? And obviously you've got elements of coming out and exploring identity and homophobia going on in both the films we've been talking about. So I've kind of been interested to hear your thoughts on the importance of those still, and what space that still holds in queer representation.
I don't fucking know. I make what's interesting to me. Like, it's not that strategic. Mm-hmm. I'm facing coming out in my relationship with Ingrid. I told my parents and it was devastating. And so when I was looking back on that relationship, a lot of that narrative was about the division between my Iranianness and my gayness. It was very personal. I wasn't thinking, or we had an onslaught of coming out narratives in gay cinema. I was like, oh, this is where my heart and my mind are at. In terms of like Cameron Post, that's a story that really spoke to me, and it spoke to me as a teen story specifically, and it wasn't as much about coming out as much as it was about it felt like being gay was not the point of the film and coming out was not the point of the film, but it was more about establishing your own way of living in your own chosen family and your own like bullshit detector, and not allowing other people to tell you how to live. It didn't feel like a coming out narrative to me. But I agree. I mean, I get bored of the same narratives. I think that we should have all kinds of gay stories. It doesn't need to be the focal point. But also, I'm not like a gay queer cinema historian. Like, these aren't where my interest lies. I don't care about looking at the like overall. Like, I agree. We should be beyond that conversation. And I agree, I get bored. I wouldn't make another coming out movie at this stage because I'm over that stage in my life. But it's also really personal. And as someone who makes things, like, I don't judge where the trends lie. I more judge where my interest lies, which is really subjective.
I mean, well, for me, like, I agree. I think that's the whole point, that you... there's always going to be a new generation of queer kids coming out. There's always going to be a new story to tell in that area. And they're not going to necessarily want to look back at the thing that we did in the 90s or the 2000s and be like, oh, all these people with their like hip, like landline phones, like doing their coming out stories. Like that's not necessarily going to be. And to your point, the idea of it being something that was personal to you, how many Iranian bisexual coming out stories had you seen on the screen? Like, that's not, do you know what I mean? Like, I think I absolutely agree that there's, that it's not, realistically, it isn't that there's the same story being told over and over again. It's that there's this particular element that, like, you could equally say, how many times have we seen the story of two people getting married on screen? God, like, aren't we over getting married yet? Like, because it is a big part of a lot of people's lives, and that's not seen that way because the idea is that it isn't as niche, maybe. But yeah, no.
Well, do it differently. Like, you tell any story, they've all been told before. They just haven't been told by you. So if someone does it in a way that's like regurgitating the same narratives over and over, it's going to suck. It's going to be boring. But if you do it in a new way, which I'm not saying I'm not guilty of, by the way. I'm not saying I'm above any of it. I have issues with Appropriate Behaviour. I don't think it's a perfect film. But I do think that we could have a million more coming out stories if they are really well done, really fresh, authentic, new perspective I haven't seen before.
I just realised as we're saying this, I genuinely didn't realise this. Behind me is, and it's the film cover as well. I've got like the old cover somewhere from back when I first started doing it. So
you have two copies.
It is like I planned it, but I definitely actually didn't. All these.
That is one of the coolest things in my life. The fact that like that book cover. I remember thinking as we were adapting it, that I told Cecilia, I was like, "What if they do a reprint?" And she was like, oh, what if they do it? Like it was such a huge dream. That kind of shit, really. I pinch myself.
And so, I mean, like, I'm not gonna lie, I got this free from work. I work at Penguin and I work on the teen books. So I was like, this was happening while I was also doing stuff with them. So I was just like, yes, nailed it. Right. So you kind of talked about the idea of like not being obviously like a queer film historian. But are there queer filmmakers, things that you've watched that you really inspire you, whether in your own work or just in general, like nothing to do with what you're producing, but you just really fucking love them?
I'm trying to think because my taste is changing right now. I haven't seen this film in years, but I did really love high art when I was coming out. It was one of those films that I like watched again and again. I don't know if I'd still love it, but it really helped me during a tender time.
I think we all have films like that we watch when we're younger. And I always have that moment where I go to recommend something like that to someone and I'm like, is it just this really like specific moment and nostalgia and like thing that was really good for me and I'm going to recommend it and they're going to be like, what were you doing? I saw or I heard an interview with you talking about, this is where I can't remember because it's the longest film title in the world, the codependent lesbian space alien seek same.
I love that film. That film is so silly and funny and wonderful. I highly recommend. So this is Madeline Olnek and Codependent Lesbian Space Alien Seek Same.
That's the one. It is a wild ride. It is a wild ride, that film.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, but also talk about like playing with form, playing with structure, playing with comedy. Like, I've just never seen anything like that. And that's queer cinema at its best. Like, that's what makes these films, because also like being queer breaks the rules. Shouldn't our cinema break the rules? Like, shouldn't there be something there that plays with form and does it while still maintaining your interest and your excitement?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm going to go to one of these questions again. I'm going to take.
We should shout out to Campbell X and that way.
Oh my God. I was like,
if we're talking about queer films,
that's going to be next week's film, and like was writing down the notes from Amelia, who was like, oh, by the way, don't forget to tell everyone what's happening next week. And I was like, oh, it's going to be Stud Live with, yes, like what a good, listen, everyone who's watching this, you have been spoiled. These people who Peccadillo have been getting for this Sofa Club are so cool, obviously present company included. It's so exciting. Don't know if anyone watched the GBF one on Tuesday with my lovely co-host Jazza, but that was also fantastic. Had three whole guests. He was getting greedy, honestly.
Still has had some wonderful films.
This is what I mean. I went on a call with the guys at Peccadillo and was just gushing to them. Like me and Jazz are talking about it all of the time on the podcast because I just feel like they're doing so much in the UK for queer films and queer cinema. And I remember buying the DVDs from them when I was a teenager to have like queer movie nights and like watching them, and some of those films are still ones that I talk about, and when I do, so many other people join in being like, oh my God, I didn't realize anyone else had seen that, like I love that so much. And there's like this wave of people with these films that are super like meant so much to them and still do, that are all coming from this one distributor that's like really gets the kind of exciting, eclectic, different cinema that people really want to see, which is just exciting.
I should say also that when I first conceived of Appropriate Behaviour and Cecilia came on board, she contacted Peccadillo and asked if they would be interested in write us, like, I don't know if it was a letter of intent or just like a letter that was like, we would invest in this, or like we would distribute this potentially. I think they did me a solid. Like, they didn't know me. They didn't have a sense of like the film could have sucked, but they were on board and supportive. And that, it's funny, like the things that keep you going when all signs point to no. Like, there was so much rejection, there were no opportunity. It felt like there were no opportunities, but then this one light, like sometimes some months, some weeks, some years, there's just one person being like, hey, I kind of believe in you. And that's just enough to keep you going for that period of time. And the year before I made Appropriate Behaviour was one of those years where I just really swung from like one leap of faith to the other. And it was Peccadillo who really helped me out.
Oh, guys. let's do some stuff in the chat. Let's just like get through these because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask some stuff of you. We're going to be bouncing around. These are not going to be particularly well ordered as I attempted to make the rest of it, but we're going to work with that. Christiane asks, your films have a way of capturing the time without being in your face about it. Cameron Post specifically with the music, clothing, etc. Is it something you put a lot of thought into? Yeah.
I mean, I think you put a lot of thought into every element of the film because you go over it so much. It's such a meticulous art form. And with Cameron Post, I was very lucky to have a team, like between my production designer, Marcus Kirshner, and Stacey Berman, who did the costumes. They had excellent taste and they knew what I wanted, which was subtlety, but authenticity, and for everything to be from the 90s, which they did.
Amazing.
But it's not like cutesy hitting you over the head with it. Like I didn't want it to be another character and like call so much attention to itself.
Yeah. George asks, both Cameron Post and Appropriate Behaviour have pretty open-ended final scenes. Mm. Did you ever consider continuing character stories that you've written before?
No. I always have a pretty strong sense of how I want something to end. It's usually one of the first like images I have in my head. And I have to say, with everything I've made, including shorts, the ending has always been the most simple part of the film to me. And I really struggle with beginnings. Beginnings change often, and in post too. And with Appropriate Behaviour, we even had to do a reshoot to get the first scene. But with both films, I knew the end.
Mm-hmm. We have had one on Instagram from Sophie J, who wants to know, for you, what are the cornerstones of good representation? Which I think is a particularly interesting question for you, gathering that we've talked about the idea of like being inappropriate and what that means, because I think potentially there's, with the very looking at more mainstream queer rep, for example, the idea of like a really good gay character is one who is like this but not like this. So it's almost interesting to ask about good representation, because I guess potentially from what you've said before, maybe for you good is authentic or something different to a sort of moral idea of good.
Human, honest, real.
Mm-hmm.
And well crafted. Like, to me, bad craft, it's like, I mean, I don't want your representation, but I'm also a snob. Like I have a really specific taste. And that's what it is, I think, to be a director, is like to be like, this is right and everything else is wrong. And I know the way I speak makes me sound like an asshole. Like, I think like there's one thing and everything else is crap, but like, that's also my job, is to believe that there's one answer and everything else is crap. Because when you're directing, there's so many choices thrown at you, and you just naturally have this opinion of what's right and what's wrong. And basically that's all to say that like, this is good representation is according to my taste. It's your idea of good representation will be according to your taste. And we all come at this from a different place. But to me, good representation is like honest, authentic, compelling. I think like I want it to be interesting. And then what's compelling to me is really fucking arbitrary. Yeah. I know. What's good representation to you?
Similar. I have a lot of thoughts about what I think is really interesting is that there's a lot of, in some people's, not necessarily just in film, but in general's, want to be seen as normal or worthy. And that comes obviously a lot with the arguments when we were having the debates about equal marriage, the idea of like, we are just like you, we are very normal, please let us have rights. You end up getting into this conversation where any discussion about stuff that maybe tags that a little bit by being like, hey, maybe we should talk about like issues of domestic violence in queer relationships. Maybe that should be something we should tackle. You end up having to sort of weirdly censor that. And that can end up being really kind of problematic in the real world when you're trying to raise money for, domestic violence charities and things like that. So I think that it's what I'm hoping the future of representation can be is to make space for those like inter-community and intra-community conversations where we say this isn't a conversation necessarily about straight people versus queer people, but it's looking at those conversations and tensions and issues that are happening within the community and allowing people to tell those stories as well would be just as interesting to me and probably more interesting to me than having a kind of idea of good representation that kind of presents us to a kind of majority straight and cis audience and says, care about us, please. We are good people. So that's kind of, and that was what was so interesting for me about Appropriate Behaviour, was that there was not really any sense of like a, here are the myths about bisexuality and I will bust them by being the best bisexual I can be. Like, that was definitely not what was happening. But it also wasn't saying, look, this woman who is about to go and have kind of various sexual encounters to try and get over her ex is doing it because she's bisexual and this is what they do. It was a really interesting, as you said, very like honest human way of being like, sometimes people do things, it's okay. Sometimes they fit a stereotype, sometimes they don't, but ultimately everyone's on their own journey. And that's a really kind of exciting element, I think, that you brought to that film that made a lot of sense for what I think is, very inverted commas, good representation.
Right.
And I think I've got just a couple more, unless Milia's going to send any more through on the chat. We have, what is the, what's happening now with you around projects that you're working on? I don't know whether there's been stuff that's potentially been put on the back burner because of the unprecedented times that we are living in which it would be impossible to film anything. I don't know if there's anything you can say about things, or the things are under wraps, or you're working on things that you don't want to talk about, but I thought I would ask just in case.
I'll talk about it. So I'm juggling a few projects. I'm right now about to finish the first draft. I'm like so close and so far. You know, when you like hit the scene, you just don't know how to write.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm really close to finishing the first draft of my next film. Inshallah, it's my next film. It takes place in Iran during the 70s, during the Islamic Revolution. It is not gay at all. I recently texted Cecilia like in the middle of the night, and I was like, should this character be a lesbian? And she was like, I think you're just feeling pressure to like push in like a strong arm a dyke in. And I was like, kind of, like, I'm worried, but it's inspired by my family, and it's really exciting. Like, it's nothing I've ever approached before, and I just think it's going to be spectacular when it comes together. But that might be a long journey now because it's ambitious and it's going to be hard to make. So anyway, I am writing that. I am also writing. Oh, it's so obnoxious of me. Damn it, this is going to be on YouTube. I'm going to be like, my next film is going to be spectacular. I guess what I'm saying is like, I'm ambitiously approaching something that scares the shit out of me, and I am nervous but excited, and I think, you know, hopefully it'll be great. But I sound really cocky and obnoxious.
What I'm kind of hoping for you is that this trajectory that you're on keeps going, so that you're basically doing the trajectory of every like white boy filmmaker who made a short and then ended up getting given a Marvel film. Like, that's basically my hope for you, is that it kind of just like keeps going, where you get what you deserve, and then no one's like, oh, she's a woman.
Awkward. So I'm working on that, and then I have a book that needs to be finished. So hopefully this time will be book writing time. And I'm just now beginning a new like romantic comedy script that we'll see where that goes.
Amazing.
But I'm excited. I'm percolating. I'm working. I hope to have new stuff to share soon. And actually, I think like for me, one of the things that's keeping me sane is having these very tangible goals. Just like I have this time can obviously be so fucking lonely. And I every day meet on Skype with two friends who are also writing. So we say we do it for 3 hours, and like every hour we take, after the hour, a 10-minute break. And we do this every day. And I just know from like 12:30 to like 4 or 5-ish, I'm on the Skype with them. And that's been really helpful and given me, and like having hope for the future, and having hope for like how the rom-com I'm writing would be written within the confines of like having a very, very few people on set, very few characters. And I like the idea of trying to build something again, like we did with The Slope and Appropriate Behavior, underneath those confines. Like, what would that look like? And I don't know if there are any filmmakers watching. I think it's easy to get lost and overwhelmed and foggy with all this. And I'm definitely lost and overwhelmed and foggy. But having hope for wanting to tell stories has given me some comfort. And then also taking baths and doing drugs has also given me.
Three. It's a triple threat at the same time. I want to end on a question that I want to ask, because we asked everyone else's. I'd be really interested to know either kind of a lesson from your life that you've taken into film and your filmmaking craft, or a lesson from doing filmmaking that you've now brought back into your life in terms of how you're living it, whether those things feed into each other, and whether there's something that you're like, this is an outlook that's changed because of what I've created, or this is the way in which something that I really think has ended up in my work.
I definitely think that work bleeds into my life more, that I'm more alive in my work than in my life, or more present and more ambitious and more confident with work than I am as a human being operating in the world. I have a lot of limitations as a human being, and I'd like to think that I'm fewer as a professional filmmaker. For sure, my ability to take up space and believe in my own narrative as a director and a writer has bled into my actual life. The confidence I have with that, like, I don't doubt the worth of my work in the marketplace. I don't doubt the worth of the stories I have to tell. And also, like, I think not waiting for other people to enable you, not like the way Appropriate Behaviour got made was pushing and elbowing out the space for it, is saying like, no, I believe in this, this is happening. And whether or not you, like, financier, you famous producer, you famous whoever, powerful entities, with or without you, I think my EP said something on a Q&A once that really touched me, that he was like, someone's like, well, what happened? How did you get in touch with Desiree? Or how did you decide to get involved in Appropriate Behaviour? And he was like, when I talked to Desi about it, I knew she was going to make it with or without me. And so I decided it was going to be with me. And it's true. And I think that's a lesson that I've taken into my life for sure. And it's easier, I think, sometimes to be confident about something tangible like a script or a film than in you. And so that's helped me fake it till I make it, of like my confidence for myself, to say like, no, this is the thing. And when I was promoting that film, it was really easy to be like, this thing isn't me. It's I believe in this. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think that it's bled into self-belief and in the way that I conduct myself as like a woman in the world.
Amazing. That is all we have time for tonight.
I have a question for you.
Go for it.
Girl, it's a compliment. Your hair is bonkers nice.
Thank you.
Color is so perfect. Your skin is porcelain. How and why, and congratulations.
Oh my God, thank you so much. A very old lady on my government mandated walk from 7 feet away also told me I had nice hair the other day. So I was like, okay. I won't feel so bad about the fact my roots are really...
The roots are quarantine roots. If you didn't have roots, I would have a problem. What
I'm really excited for is because I reckon by the time quarantine ends, my whole fringe will be brown and it will just be like a very strong bowl cut look, which I'll just be rocking.
Today I saw a video of Billie Eilish and I was like, why are her roots not bad? Like, her roots are still cute. And I was like, not having it. I was like, she is quarantining with a hairdresser, or like, I don't know what's happening. I'm a big fan, so I don't want to throw any shade. I have questions. She's not where you're at, and where you're at is quarantine chic. And I think it's a look. Like, I think we should document and celebrate quarantine chic. And yeah, it'll become like a bowl. I think it's like a reverse. I like it.
Going to be a whole mood. I very much did that thing where I waited until the very last minute. I was meant to be getting my hair bleached literally the day that I came back from holiday, and then the lockdown was happening.
Oh, I was waiting for a haircut too.
Like, at what point do I start trying to trim this? It'll be fine. I'll see you and I'll just have a completely shaved head. It'll be great.
I know. I do keep fantasizing about that, and I'm like, no, I can't handle feeling ugly and like the world is ending. Like, I can't. My crippling depression and my vanity, one or the other. So I'm gonna hold on to the vanity and let the crippling depression just wash over me.
I mean, love that. Love a bit of lockdown chic. Thank you so much for joining us. This was so interesting. It was so exciting. I've been like a long-term fan of what you do, so it's been really interesting to hear about your work and your thoughts and everything.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to seeing what you release on your podcast and with Penguin Books.
I'm excited. Thank you. Cool. So we are going to. I'm gonna look at my notes again because I don't want to get this wrong. As I kind of mentioned earlier, sneak peek, Peccadillo Sofa Club is going to be back next week on Thursday, May the 7th with Stud Life. So Martha Margetson from Fringe Queer Film and Arts Fest will be chatting with director Campbell X, as well as lead actors Robin Kerr and Tania Miller, which I'm so excited about. Oh God. So as with this week, you can watch the film from 7 and then join in with the live Q&A here at 8:45 BST, British Summertime. So if you're not in the UK, you are going to have to do a Google, I'm afraid. So before I say goodbye, I just wanted to mention again, I co-host the Queer Movie Podcast. So if you are interested in queer films, then check us out because we chat some stuff. And if you are like, I need more queer films in my life, Thursdays are not enough. We host a queer movie club every Saturday. We kind of start the film at 8 p.m. and everyone joins the Discord or on Twitter to have a chat about it. And our one for this Saturday is the half of it, which is not actually out yet. It is coming out tomorrow on Netflix. It is Saving Grace Rue's new movie, which is like a queer teen Cyrano de Bergerac vibe, which is, I'm very excited about it. I'm going to have to stop myself watching it on Friday so I can save it for the 8 o'clock slot. So yeah, join us then if you are interested. And the last thing we're going to leave you with is the trailer for Stud Life to give you a little preview of next week.
Oh! What? Oh, it's not deliberate.
That's Seb, my brethren. Why am I so tight with a gay man? Well, if I was tight with a femme, it might get kind of complicated. Mates with one mouth?
Cast before cock.
Yo, Seb, brother, I'm so sorry. You don't like Elle, do you? No, furthermore, you can't stand seeing with somebody.
No, she's not right for you.
Elle is voluptuous.
All you got to do, tell me what to do. Call me on the phone.
Elle?
Seb,
No, hang on, mate. You told me to tell you if I thought you were going after someone who was bad.
oh, back blood.
Nah, hang on, bruv. I am not your fucking slave.
What is true love? How'd you know when you found it?
But I need your love.